Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Back in 1970s Britain, as a child, I remember the government making admirable attempts on TV and in the cinema to provide the public with recommendations and warnings surrounding anything in society that needed caution. They ranged from gentle suggestions aimed at adults on how to save water and electricity to more extreme mini-horror films pitched at children, alerting them to the dangers of live power cables, farm machinery, unsafe waters and road traffic, etc. Their methods were eclectic, depending on the subject and audience, as well as tonally on the time of day. The famous Noel Coward-style bedtime routine couple dancing their way around the house, disconnecting any potential fire hazard items, is a charming example of palatable late-night advice, especially for vulnerable adults. Cartoon or stop-motion animation was one method of getting the message across to the little ones. Who from my generation in Britain can forget the Charlie Says cartoon series, featuring the little boy and his impenetrable gobbledygook-spouting cat, voiced incidentally by Kenny Everett, softly urging us to beware of sex offenders? Another means was to film real scenes using friendly actors who were household names to children, such as the then-recent third Doctor Who Jon Pertwee in the over-sophisticated road safety acronym campaign Splink in 1976. This led to a plethora of weird and wonderful films, some fondly recalled, others indelibly stamped with fear on young, impressionable minds. I intend to focus on the latter as a valid addition to the horror canon that is not only uniquely British, but showcased later notable actors and long-form film directors, such as John Mackenzie, who went from the tractor terror of Apaches in 1977 to gangster menace in his 1980 seminal feature The Long Good Friday. It's easy to forget that the 70s were a time of greater innocence for children. Rather than ignore the warnings and stride into the dangerous waters of grumpy old man territory, I don't imply they were better days, but young kids were certainly protected from exposure to types of material that erodes naivety increasingly early nowadays. The discovery of AIDS in the mid-1980s required a more graphic sex education. The omnipresent and invaluable internet is a largely open door to easily accessible pornography. Health and safety demands create debatably draconian rules for what used to be slightly more relaxed attitudes. There is also the heightened post-millennial awareness about pedophilia that is ingrained in children much more now than when we were in their place. An important and rosier aspect to consider is that back then in the pre-digital era, children played much more on derelict waste grounds and old bomb sites from the still ongoing post-war reconstruction. Actor Terry Sue Pratt, who was in the infamous The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, and went on to TV fame as Benny in the children's show Grange Hill, recalled, "There were no computer games, 3 TV channels, and kids lived outdoors. Entertainment was going on adventures, finding excitement in odd places." These youngsters arguably needed stronger cautioning against outdoor perils than later generations who often substitute real-world dangers for safer indoor Xbox and PS console thrills. These tightly plotted, short, sharp shocks are sadly the end of a discontinued legacy, a talent training ground, and arguably still necessary part of educating our young that is no longer with us, creating the same impact. Take my hand as we explore 3 of the most famous, indeed infamous, films of that era. Stay close and don't talk to strangers. The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, 1973. 1973 England was a somewhat gloomy place to live. The country was besieged by increasing inflation rates, and by the year's end the national miners' strike was one of many instigated to force public sector pay rises, leading to the Conservative government declaring a 3-day working week to husband the dwindling stocks of fuel. Meanwhile, an even doomier note was struck in the tone of an unforgettable public information film with its own literal Grim Reaper. The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, written and directed by Jeff Grant, was commissioned after the Home Secretary Reginald Maudling was pressured by ROSPA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, over the unacceptable number of accidental child drownings in Britain. Something was needed to warn kids in no uncertain terms about the dangers of playing near treacherous waters, and if the vivid memories of my generation are anything to go by, it worked extremely well, even decades after seeing it only once. Voiced by the esteemed master eccentric actor Donald Pleasance, a veteran of my own alma mater, Ecclesfield School, the robed and hooded spirit stalks the watersides looking for children innocently risking their lives at the edges of ponds and rivers. The show-off, the fool. His voice is the most memorable facet of the film, a chilling, matter-of-fact narration edged with a faux concern that fools no one. This is a predator who lurks in hope of engulfing a young life. We never see his face. We don't need to. The cinematography effectively captures the misty foreboding of the murky depths that await the reckless. A little blond boy slips down a muddy bank, and it's game over for him, as the spirit arrives ominously behind his friends to blankly witness his latest statistic. An older boy chances his arm, literally, hanging from a branch to overreach for something on the water's surface. "It'll never take his weight," observes the spirit with silky, restrained glee. A sign ordering, "Danger, no swimming," prefaces a tracking shot detailing a veritable scrapyard's worth of rusty old jalopies, beds, and weeds, death-trap henchmen of his to snare and drown young, flailing bodies. But our opportunistic monk has his own kryptonite. "Sensible children. I have no power over them," he curses, the line echoing to reinforce the power of common sense to the audience. "Oi, mate, that's a stupid place to swim," admonishes a Cockney stage school artful dodger as he and his pal help out a bedraggled kid in trunks who'd attempted swimming in such a picturesque spot. The only slightly false note is the dialogue when the lead boy says, "Here, mate, cover yourself with this." It doesn't quite ring true as a real child's reaction, more that of a mouthpiece for shoehorning in sober adult responsibility. One of them throws the spirit's empty cassock into the muddy water, causing Pleasance's ghostly kiss-off, "I'll be back," likewise underlined with a powerfully ominous reverb. The lack of incidental music adds to the clinical documentary feel of The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, 90 seconds of succinct and haunting skill, and a lesson in safety and filmmaking to all. Apaches, 1977. 6 children play on a farm. 5 will never return home, a description in the BFI synopsis. Apaches, the infamous 27-minute short directed by John "The Long Good Friday" Mackenzie, was designed to warn children in rural areas about the perils of playing around farm machinery. It attained a lasting infamy for doing this unforgettably to those who saw it firstly in the intended market of schools. Such was the film's success that it was also broadcast in TV territories like Anglia and Westwood that featured heavily rural areas. Apaches deserves to be considered alongside mainstream horror films of the era, not only for its impact on school children, but for the rare luxury of an above-average budget's extended running time, enabling it to have time for a narrative and cinematic technical style beyond the usual quick cutting of a commercial. At almost 30 minutes in the full-length version, it works as much as a piece of fictional movie storytelling as it does as an educational public information film. The log line I quoted at the beginning, taken from the BFI's website, could easily have been the tagline for a horror feature film ad campaign. The film was produced by Graphic Films for the government's Central Office of Information, for whom it eventually broke records for Central Film Library's distribution of its prints. Mackenzie had begun his training apprentice to Ken Loach, famed for the realism of his own films, and had so far directed 2 features, including the disturbing Unman, Wittering and Zygo, which already explored an escalating horror atmosphere amongst schoolchildren suspected of murdering a young teacher's predecessor. As Loach's assistant director, he would have been familiar with directing within low budgets, encouraging young, untutored talent, a principle his mentor was famous for adopting in his casting to gain greater truth. The director of photography was Phil Mayhew, who likewise moved on to a Hollywood career lensing such blockbusters as the Bond films GoldenEye and Casino Royale for director Martin Campbell. The screenwriter Neville Smith went on to double as both a writer and TV actor. Apaches was shot by necessity very quickly on a farm in the home counties in February 1977, using kids from a junior school in Maidenhead rather than typically precocious stage school children. The aforementioned plot centers around their make-believe play acting around a farm, skillfully cross-cut with later scenes preparing for Danny, the leading character's birthday party, and the aftermath of each death. He narrates the film, which at first marvelously recreates the feel of classic westerns, framing the children in a dusk silhouette against the horizon, titling the movie in the playbill font familiar from the genre. It sounds like it is he who begins the voiceover reading as an American child before switching to his own. If so, it's not a bad imitation of an American accent. We see Danny and his gang made up as playground Indians, led by him stridently as Geronimo, their cheeks daubed with paint and sporting bandanas. Most are tousle-haired boys, plus one girl who ably gives as good as she gets in this company. I've already revealed the multiple tragedy at the heart of the story, but it unfolds as a compelling war of attrition in a sense, with Danny's narration nicely drawing allusions between the struggle of the Native American and his fight for preservation against the white oppressor, and the gradual whittling down of his modern-day merry band. Each of the children's deaths redoubles his role-play character's defiant stance. The first child buys it when the posse attack a tractor pulling a trailer of hay bales. They whoop after it, with him standing in triumph atop the flatbed. A moment later, sharp editing has him falling off under the wheels with a fleeting shot of his broken rifle and bloodstains, to mark his last fatal stand. This loss is starkly noted by cutting to their teacher in school, tearing his label from his empty cloakroom coat hook. There will be many more victims to the paleface. British kids of the 1970s will enjoy the evocation of the period in the mentioning of Action Man dolls, our version of the American G.I. Joe, and the required Saturday morning viewing of children's TV favorite Swap Shop. The dialogue between the cast is always believable, illogically competitive, immature and playful. A game of kick the can results in the next boy kicking the bucket when he is engulfed by quicksand like mud. After he glugs his way to the choir invisible, his personal belongings are taken from his desk by a teacher in a barren classroom. Whilst I may be somewhat flippant in describing the fatalities, they are handled on screen with taste and weight, the post-mortem repercussions sobering and sad in their consequences. Instead of loading the mood, though, with impending doom, Mackenzie never lets us forget the resilience of the kids. In fact, I was slightly confused by the timeline, as each death is soon forgotten in pursuit of the next role-play scenario. Is this really supposed to be all on the same day? Danny pulls a fast one on his friends by suddenly deciding he is a white cavalry general, and they are all now effectively cowboys. Sharon protests her confusion. "That's because you are thick," he offers by way of leaderly troop motivation. Good thing he wasn't a future corporate team bonding organizer. In my opinion, those are people who do need wiping out. Once the farm, Fort Sumner, is captured, reverting back to Indians again, the group find a brown bottle of unidentified liquid. We all know where that's going. A tracking shot passes down the line as each tweener redskin offers their testimony to the gods in pidgin Western movie English. "Me have many scalps." Sadly, the peer pressure overcomes Sharon's shrewd apprehension about the mystery toast drink. A couple of sips, and she's shrieking in death throes of agony at her parents' house, mercifully left as a house exterior with the bedroom lights on. The fledgling Orson Welles, Danny, switches the game, and indeed the genre once more, by briefly having them play as 70s TV detective faves Starsky and Hutch, complete with some amusing faux-weary cop attitude. I'm getting too old for these capers. The next child to buy the farm, as it were, gets it by being crushed with a falling metal grill, the shot lingering in powerful stillness as a trickle of blood runs down his cheek. By now, the fatalities are so macabre and numerous that it resembles a Friday the 13th film or The Shining, family ravaged by sentient possessed farm. Seriously, it wouldn't take much for Apaches to be retooled as a supernatural horror feature film instead of a didactic health and safety piece. Another child jumps off a gate to his doom. This one is lightly unclear, and so it's left to Geronimo Danny himself as the last of the Mohicans. By the end, he states his creed nobly that, having cast aside his tribe's weapons, we shall survive, which is awfully ironic as he takes a header over a hill trying to drive a runaway tractor in the most notorious and brilliantly sickening death. The staging and effects work for the crash is held in the frame with brutal effectiveness. There is no cutting as he plummets down the hill to a hideous stop. This must have shocked viewing youngsters into numbness. Finally, after a brief but telling funeral service, the dirt hitting his coffin with simple finality, Danny's birthday party goes ahead, but tragically it is turned into a wake for his mourning family. "I wish I was there. Honest," he offers. To compound the warning, Mackenzie closes by scrolling up a list of real-life children who, in the year before this film was made, suffered farmyard death due to electrocution, suffocation in a grain pit, burning to death, and via an explosion, a roll call that reads like a set of cuts from a British Board of Film Classification video nasty viewing. If this stark cinematic warning didn't stop kids fooling about down on the farm, nothing would. The Finishing Line, 1977. In 1977, British Transport Films felt they needed a stark public information film warning of the dangers to children of playing on railway lines. This was a major national concern since almost everywhere in Britain lies within reach of a working rail line, even after the country received a Dr. Beeching's powder of network cuts. Director John Krish, together with co-writer William Gilmore, came up with a powerful and clever way to appeal to children without tiresome preaching. They staged the type of terrible tragedies that could actually happen within a surreal fantasy story dreamed up by a school-age skinhead fantasist on a railway bridge. In his head, he hears the stern voice of his headmaster, reminiscent of TV's Arthur Lowe, addressing the school on the subject of railway risks. "The railway is not the games field," he barks. The boy daydreams of what it would be like if it could be, triggering an elaborate sports day setup at the trackside, complete with tents, the entire school turning out and equipped with St. John's ambulance staff, and the ominous sight of stretchers being laid out. Over the next 20 minutes, a teacher over the tannoy announces a series of 4 events, each based upon a prankish activity that kids carry out life-threateningly on railway lines. The first is the fence-breaking event, which consists of the pupils pouring down the embankment and crossing to the other side. They are divided for the day into competitive color-coded teams, and score points accordingly based on their success. Sadly, one boy comes a cropper and knocks himself out on the line. He is run over by an oncoming train. His tragedy, like all the deaths suffered in the film, is conveyed with sensitivity and responsibility. We never see an impact. Krish focuses instead on the aftermath, whose repercussions linger far worse. The next event is stone throwing, staged with alarmingly effective direction by having the kids hurl the stones with ferociously aggressive facial expressions, rather than an attitude of innocent fun. The conductor stops the train, and in lieu of telling off the children, continues the surreal angle by marking the kids' accuracy in blinding a blood-stained driver and passenger. A direct hit! 6 points! Last across is the third round, in which all 4 teams, 2 on each side, must cross the track and each other to claim victory with only 3 seconds to avoid a 50-mile-an-hour train. No prizes for guessing the outcome here. Inevitably they are mown down, and judicious editing cuts to their mangled bodies littering the line. The final obstacle is the most lethal of all, the Great Tunnel Walk, with its 3 miles of dank total darkness to negotiate. This is well mounted, featuring what looks like an entire school of kids entering in a long queue. All were actually recruited from local schools in the home counties. One by one, a handful stagger out in a soot-smudged and blood-stained daze to be ticked off by a teacher's register. The less lucky ones are carried out by the ambulance team and nurses. This prompts the film's most impressive sequence, as the bodies of the dead are laid out on the track as if signaling the fallen in battle. The brass band's last post-eulogy movingly underscores the aftermath of fictitious war. Returning to the boy lazing on the bridge, we are left to hear the headmaster's closing statement loaded with post-traumatic meaning. If any of you think that playing on the railway is a good idea, perhaps he or she would care to stand up. And we cut to black. In delivering its message via dark humor, The Finishing Line is a public information film definitely on the right track. It mines anxieties and signposts its vital educational concerns without patronizing its audience, whilst succeeding as an excellent standalone short film appreciable by viewers of any age, and is available, like The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, on YouTube. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.